It should come as no surprise to those familiar with regular show that when tackling a holiday like Halloween, they would obviously knock it out of the park. After 3 seasons, it had already cemented itself as a unique fusion of relatable real-world problems with bizarre, outlandish, cosmic adventures, often resulting in a surreal nightmare. So naturally, combining this with spooky holiday festivities was a big success, ultimately launching an annual tradition on Cartoon Network over the next 6 years, right up until the 8th and final season. These specials, known as Terror Tales of the Park, pushed the series' typical boundaries, from demonic dolls and vengeful scarecrows to a moment where our main duo consumed the severed, chocolatized limbs of corpses. It only seems appropriate for the season that we re-explore each installment, diving into the pop culture references, those memorable creatures, and even shocking demises. That's right, since Terror Tales episodes are non-canonical and have no effect on the main continuity, this allowed the writers more creative liberty to raise the stakes, with it becoming a defining long-running gag that almost everyone in the main cast dies by the final frame of the story. Often in a ridiculous, exaggerated way, of course. This non-consequential freedom was established right out of the gate in Terror Tales 1, which premiered on the 10th of October, 2011. When it comes to formatting, these specials all follow an anthology structure that is framed around the park crew gathering at the house and sharing scary tales on Halloween night. As this series went on, other secondary characters were added, and these wraparound segments thankfully got more involved, because honestly, the overarching plotline here is probably the least interesting and easily the most basic, as it's essentially just their reactions after hearing each of the 3 stories. The first and shortest tale is told by Pops and is called Creepy Doll. In it, Mordecai and Rigby are helping Pops clean out his room when they come across a mysterious Victorian doll from Pops' childhood named Percy. Pops raves about how popular and ahead of his time Percy was, as he's able to recite many phrases, mainly variations of how badly he wants to drawl on people's faces.
Seriously, I'm gonna draw on your face.
For some reason. They try to get rid of the doll for being lame, but he comes to life and attacks the trio, before the 3 get the upper hand by slow motion kicking him into the furnace, turning Percy all nice and crispy, much like Chucky before him. Directly following this is Muscle Man's story, Death Metal Crash Pit. It centers on Muscle Man and High Five Ghost getting caught in some dense fog after leaving the Halloween party, until they stumble onto a rundown RV. The duo naturally decides they want to drive it into the park's crash pit, though before they can successfully go through with this, the original ghostly hair metal owners who died in the RV appear and trap the two. The band nearly drives them over the edge, but Muscle Man halts them by giving them the idea of putting on a final, ultimate heavy metal rock concert. Their performance, however, is so terrible that Muscle Man just decides he'd rather be driven off the edge anyway, than be forced to listen to another second, turning him into Muscle Ghost and High Five Ghost into, well, never mind. Rigby narrates our third and final tale, In the House. This segment is a true standout, not only because it takes up the largest bulk of the runtime, but also because it does such an amazing job at seamlessly mixing absurd humor with genuinely dark and unsettling moments. It also involves all of the show's main characters instead of centering on just a couple. In the opening, we see Mordecai and Rigby going door to door, attempting to trick everyone into handing over treats. After the pair arrive at the final house and notice the owner is pretending not to be home, Rigby begins to egg the place. Though in true regular show fashion, he instantly discovers it shelters a twisted wizard.
Want to play Twisted Wizard?
Who then places a cruel curse on him. The next day, Rigby abruptly begins transforming into a house. As he rapidly inflates to the point of becoming immobile, Mordecai rushes over to apologize to the wizard, but he isn't there. Or so he thought. By the time Mordecai arrives back at the park, Rigby has become a fully functional house. Or so we believe.
Whoa, there's even a bathroom! Hey, Rigby, can I—
No way!
The gang then receives a creepy phone call from somebody who kinda sounds like Ghostface, but is actually just the wizard.
What's your favorite scary movie?
That night, the crew gears up, preparing themselves to battle against the wizard, who, one by one, takes out each of the house guests in hilariously over-the-top ways. Starting with Muscle Man, who is dragged away while firing aimlessly up into the sky before subsequently revealing himself at the front door as, well, Muscle Man.
I told you I was ripped.
The final grand consequence for Rigby's mischievous behavior, however, comes when the wizard opens a box and proceeds to violently egg him as karma. After the story ends, we cut back to everybody at the house, where the ultimate twist is that Rigby was the wizard all along. Overall, this first entry is pretty solid. Creepy Doll works well as a parody of films like Child's Play, and apparently took inspiration from the real-life urban legend of Robert the Doll, a famously cursed homemade doll from the early 1900s. And I love how In the House made use of that frantic string pluck sound used in The Shining. Speaking of Stephen King, one thing that really threw me off guard upon revisiting these specials is learning that Ello Gov'nor wasn't a part of the Terror Tales lineup. I don't know if that's some type of Mandela effect, but apparently it aired separately in season 2, despite being a chaotic and hilarious parody of Christine. If it hasn't become evident yet, this franchise is clearly inspired by The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror, which makes sense considering if you know anything about series creator J.G. Quintel, he's cited it as being his favorite animated series and being the main inspiration for him getting into animation on numerous occasions. However, unlike The Simpsons, which quickly ditched the framing device of telling spooky stories in the backyard treehouse before eventually abandoning wraparound segments entirely, regular show for the most part kept its format consistent. Such is the case for Terror Tales of the Park 2, which premiered the following year on October 15th. This installment saw some minor additions. For one, in the main overarching plotline, we see the guys telling stories while on their way to a big Halloween costume party. This set off the tradition of them dressing up in fun referential outfits each year. Secondly, because we're in season 4, Terror Tales 2 marked the first to feature their new intern, Thomas, though he never ends up receiving his own dedicated segment. Similar to the first special, the opening story, Payback, is the shortest of the whole episode. In it, Mordecai recounts a tale where he accidentally unalives his uncle Steve during a bowling match and is subsequently haunted by his corpse. Mordecai is tormented by guilt, only to find in the end that his uncle was simply just trying to return the $5 he owed him from the round of bowling. Our next tale, Party Bus, is one of my favorites and does something uncommon in that it's narrated via a phone call with Margaret. The basic setup revolves around her, Mordecai, Rigby, and Eileen about to leave for a monster movie premiere. With no other means of transportation, the four hitch a ride on a party bus that is apparently killer, quite literally, as they soon realize that the longer everyone spends on said bus, the older they get. Once Margaret notices that the driver has passed their stop, it becomes clear that the party won't be dying, but they certainly will, as the four begin to shrivel up and decay. Quickly, Mordecai manages to take control of the bus, mistakenly putting the vehicle into reverse, causing them to rapidly de-age into toddlers, closing with the group leaping off the bus, and when you think it's finally all over, they shrink down further before fully disappearing from existence. After a long night of tales and other shenanigans that resulted in a car crash, an annoyed Benson declares no more scary stories, but ultimately folds on the condition that he gets to tell the final one. Wallpaper Man follows Mordecai and Rigby, who are tasked with wallpapering the interior of the house. The duo gets frustrated with the instructions and hires a specialist from a TV commercial to come in and do it for them. Initially, he seems friendly and unassuming until he finishes the entire house in only a few hours, trapping everyone inside. Why? Well, because he's actually an enormous vicious spider with the wallpaper acting as his web, thus altering the house into a giant labyrinthian maze that leads to a pretty creative chase scene. The segment concludes with a tense build-up to save the rest of the guys, and a random delivery dude who was coincidentally delivering a package of explosives for Muscle Man. Mordecai and Rigby, of course, use this to destroy the giant arachnid, along with the rest of the house. And then the closing punchline for this Terror Tales installment was actually not the original planned ending. In the original draft, the tow truck driver who had been helping them was revealed to really be a demonic zombie, not taking them to the party, but instead to the underworld. The plot involved them getting out of a traffic accident, where they would then watch their own dead bodies, the park crew who hadn't survived the collision earlier in the episode, being hauled away by zombie paramedics. Unsurprisingly, the network considered this sequence to be be a bit too frightening and disturbing for intended viewers, so in the final revised edit, Rigby and Benson get into a fight, resulting in them crashing right outside of the house where the party was taking place, and while it seems at first that they survived the wreck, we then discover that they have actually been turned into ghosts. Well, except for Fives. Overall, Terror Tales of the Park 2 featured some strong entries. Specifically, Party Bus has a very entertaining concept that also comes with a dark yet thought-provoking take on excess. Wallpaper Man was especially creative in the second half, and despite relying on the show's usual core formula of Mordecai and Rigby failing to complete a simple mundane task, leading to everyone getting caught up in surreal chaos, I think it still works being a part of the Halloween special, and is especially unnerving for anyone with arachnophobia. I'm guessing that the first Terror Tales special caught on very well with the fan base, either that or they worked overtime with promotion, because the initial broadcast for year 2 reached a record of 3.11 million US viewers, the highest viewership of any other regular show episode, just barely beating out the season 4 premiere from a couple weeks prior. With this peak success, the tradition kept rolling from here, with Terror Tales of the Park 3 airing on October 21st, 2013. This time around, our main and secondary characters are seen celebrating at the annual park Halloween party. This year, the guys have placed a motivating bet. Whoever tells the scariest tale wins a jackpot of Halloween candy, and whoever tells the worst must wear their costume until Thanksgiving. A challenge that I'd imagine would be especially brutal for Muscle Man, as he's literally dripping in peanut butter, being half of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with his girlfriend Starla.
Anybody else have a story?
Rigby kicks the special off with a story called Killer Bed. In it, Rigby is finally upgrading from a trampoline to a real bed. After 8 hours and the eventual help from Skips to get it constructed, he turns on the news that's currently informing the public of a recall on a specific brand of beds, which is totally not a parody of IKEA, that he just so happened to purchase. The beds were mistakenly manufactured and shipped with the remains of a dangerous convict who stumbled and fell into one of the machines while being confronted by the police. Rigby must have the worst luck because, as it turns out, his bed matches the exact SKU. Suddenly, the haunted mattress springs to life and pulls out an Allen wrench, as his name is Johnny Allen Wrench, after all. However, Benson uses his quick negotiating skills to give Johnny a position at the park. But the groundskeepers sneak attack him, violently chopping the sentient bed to pieces with multiple axes. Now, this next one is a real treat that is often ranked as one of, if not the best, in the entire Terror Tales lineup. Jacked Up Jack-O-Lantern, narrated by Muscle Man, opens the day after the Halloween party, with Muscle Man, Mordecai, Rigby, and High Five Ghost smashing a bunch of jack-o'-lanterns. After using the golf cart to plow through the largest pumpkin I've seen since that one iCarly episode, the guys drive off and find themselves in a nearby abandoned pumpkin patch that's being occupied by a scarecrow couple. Blatantly ignoring the warning sign, Muscle Man proceeds to stomp on the scarecrow's wife, and Fives is about to do the same with the husband, but he becomes sentient, jacked up, full of supernatural rage, and starts going on a murder spree, one by one turning the 4 into pumpkins, smashing them as karma, and collecting their seeds. In the end, he plants rows of new pumpkins, trapping the park gang's souls in the very pumpkin patch they initially set out to destroy. Back in the main Umbrella storyline, Benson arrives at the party and joins in on the Scary Stories competition. His tale, The Previous Owner, takes a slight twist on the Salem witch trials and combines it with a parody of classic haunted house films like Poltergeist and Amityville Horror. The setup is that 200 years ago, there was this pilgrim, the original owner of the park house, named Jebediah Townhouse. He just so happened to be way ahead of his time, dressing and speaking in 80s slang. Since Jebediah didn't conform to the rigid Puritan lifestyle, the townspeople suspected him of being a witch and planned to hang him. However, he MC hammers himself free and fuses his soul with the house, waiting 200 years to return and terrorize the current residents. Tonight just so happens to mark his anniversary. Benson warns everybody to pack up and leave before dusk, but instead, the rest of the guys place a bet to see who can stay overnight the longest. Surprise, surprise, Jebediah's spirit returns, only for him to realize that instead of being ahead of the times, now he's behind the times.
Well, you're wigging out, you know? I mean,
You guys are totally bogus.
No, we don't know, because no one talks like that anymore, bro.
The rest of the story consists of each character getting taken out in weird, extreme ways that kind of makes it feel like a callback to In the House from Terror Tales 1. In the end, Thomas's story is declared the least scary, and he does, in fact, continue to wear his pizza costume until that year's Thanksgiving special. Benson, on the other hand, wins for the scariest, but it turns out he wasn't lying about there being a real Jebediah townhouse, who suddenly appears to wish us homies a happy Halloween. The final real-world appearance by the ghost, wishing the viewer a happy Halloween, was a returning closing bit that wasn't present in the last special. Terror Tales 3 is arguably the best in the whole saga. It features a strong lineup of segments and a solid wraparound narrative with the competitive bet setup. The ending of Killer Bed is hilarious, seeing the bed frame peacefully watering some flowers before getting ambushed. It's great stuff. Jacked Up Jack-O-Lantern has a ton of suspense in its chase scenes, and the Vengeful Scarecrow uses a lot of puns to deliver a segment that at times feels like a nod to slashers like Freddy Krueger. Then, the previous owner has one of the most intriguing, lore-driven plots, complete with yet another memorable villain. These first 3 episodes alone would make for an exceptional Halloween-watching trilogy. The next installment, Terror Tales 4, dropped on the 29th of October 2014. For the first time since the very first Terror Tales, the characters aren't initially seen in costumes. Still, it's Halloween night and the park house is receiving its last batch of trick-or-treaters. Muscle Man tries to scare them with a creepy mask, however the kids are more frightened by his actual face and proceed to run away screaming. Inside, everyone agrees the night is still young and brainstorms ideas. Rigby suggests there's nothing scarier than visiting a haunted house, and Muscle Man replies with a usual "my mom" joke. But for the first time, everyone realizes that, hey, no one's ever actually met Muscle Man's mother, despite how much he hypes her up. So to prove that she's real and scary, the guys spend the bulk of the Umbrella segment traveling to visit Miss Sorenstein, while telling scary stories. The first is told by Pops, and is actually a parody of a short story from the 1940s called The Lottery. The park crew performs a ritual, drawing names to sacrifice one of their own to a giant man-eating cosmic hole. They believe feeding its souls will keep it satisfied and prevent a mysterious fog from consuming the park. Pops is chosen, but in classic regular show absurdity, he doesn't fit into the hole, only for it later to be revealed that the entire ritual was utterly pointless and completely inconsequential anyway. The second story, Unfinished Business, is Benson's tale, and it opens on the memorial service for Mordecai and Rigby. The only problem is that Benson was unable to fire them before their tragic accident, which is never specifically stated. Needless to say, he's terrorized by their demonic slacker spirits for weeks, desperately trying and failing to properly fire the duo, who refuse to leave. When he finally succeeds in removing the pair from the park system, the story delivers an out-of-left-field twist that Benson was the ghost all along. The implication being that he was so wrapped up in his performative role as a competent park manager and having control over his employees that his perception was rooted in a false reality, until this singular task, his unfinished business, was completed, revealing the truth. Rigby narrates our third and final tale, Scary Movie Night. It follows Mordecai, CJ, Rigby, and Eileen, who are about to watch an infamous horror movie called Triple Threat, a cursed videotape that has a Necronomicon-esque appearance. It's actually a collection of 3 scary movies that were accidentally fused. Rigby pops in the tape, the power suddenly goes out, and the 4 are immediately sucked into the film, where they must survive until the end credits. Along the way, they hilariously fail to warn the clueless characters within each of the 3 segments, playing directly into all the different cliches and tropes you would expect in each respective genre. Once all 3 stories have been told, the guys finally arrive at Miss Sorenstein's trailer, only for her to jump out and scare them away before breaking the 4th wall to wish us all a happy Halloween.
This costume gets my voice every year!
While not as strong as the last special, Terror Tales 4 still has some great, memorable highlights, like finally giving us the appearance of Muscle Man's mom. The whole is interesting in how everyone feels slightly out of character, coming off especially harsh towards Pops, but they kind of had to be written this way to match the dystopian theme of adhering to tradition, even if absurd and cruel, from the original short story. And it makes sense that Pops would simply rip directly from older classic literature, even if the tale feels out of place in context. Unfinished Business might be my favorite of all 3, as it's actually an interesting psychological mindbender, not to mention the creature designs on Mordecai and Rigby are delightfully nightmare fuel material. What truly makes the second half of the Terror Tales series stand apart is by around season 6, regular show's core tone had greatly shifted, with more time devoted to deeper character arcs and developing drama, emotional conflicts. We saw Mordecai struggling through his complicated romantic love triangle, and Rigby genuinely became more responsible and mature, making an earnest effort to improve his life due largely to the positive influence of his relationship with Eileen. On the other hand, the early seasons were largely concerned with self-contained, absurd cosmic antics, making these non-canon specials feel that much more refreshing, as they provided a brief return to form with consequence-free, bizarre hijinks between the main show's later serialized storylines. But that's not to say the Terror Tales formula never experimented, as Terror Tales 5, which premiered on October 29, 2015, is the first episode to break from the usual 3 stories to a total of 4. The second key distinction is the way these tales are framed in the umbrella plotline. The characters aren't telling them, at least not directly. Instead, they use what is essentially a supernatural ChatGPT. You see, Benson has recently purchased a wish-making machine called Racky for that year's Halloween party. The machine is simple. You tell the genie your wish, and then he shows you dark, twisted visions of that desire being granted. Benson demonstrates this by wishing he could properly motivate Mordecai and Rigby to do their jobs. The machine then conjures up a terrifying scenario in which Benson orders a dummy named Mr. Bossman to push the 2 employees to work extra hard. This dummy had to have been based on the design of Slappy from Goosebumps. However, Mr. Bossman eventually turns on Benson, possessing a sinister mind of his own, which leads to the trio destroying the puppet. Pops goes second and wishes he had more time to travel the world. What follows is a whimsically absurd tale in which all of the park crew are coincidentally attending jury duty on Halloween for the trial of a murderous werewolf named John Wolfhard. Through comedic negligence, Pops and Wolfhard wind up alone in the bathroom, where he attacks Pops before escaping and fleeing to London, where in John's words, his kind are treated with respect. Pops then transforms into a werewolf himself, and everyone simply accepts on face value that he's actually John Wolfhard. The courtroom breaks into an angry mob, chasing Pops as he rushes to and just barely books a flight to London, and the segment closes with him reuniting with Wolfhard, and the song Werewolves of London iconically playing as the plane takes off. High Five Ghost reluctantly steps up next and makes the third wish, that he could spend more time with his girlfriend Celia. Racky then grants a nightmare scenario where he gets trapped in an elevator on the way up to her apartment. This claustrophobic predicament forces him to call the sketchy maintenance man from downstairs, who only makes the terrifying situation worse. Eventually though, he arrives at her floor, where it's revealed that the guy was actually a ghost, who had been haunting the broken elevator for multiple decades. The fourth and final request comes from Rigby, who wishes he were more popular when he was younger. What follows is a story that's one half reminiscent of In the House from Terror Tales 1, and the other reminiscent of Jacked Up Jack-O-Lantern from Terror Tales 3. It's Halloween night, and Mordecai and Rigby are out trick-or-treating. Rigby keeps receiving compliments on his costume until suddenly a group of rowdy popular kids walk up and start teasing the duo, daring them to prove how cool they are by stealing all the candy from a nearby creepy abandoned house. Turns out, the property is owned by a wicked witch, who traps the pair and proceeds to turn Mordecai and Rigby into chocolate statues, after serving them severed chocolate body parts. And the segment concludes with the neighborhood kids feasting on a chocolatized Rigby. Chocolatude is probably the darkest tale out of this episode's bunch, and just so happens to be my favorite. As for the rest of the special, the wish machine Racky tries to make a getaway with a bunch of stolen goods, before ultimately getting destroyed. However, the grand twist is that the entire episode was actually just a horrific vision of Benson's wish to throw the best Halloween party. While it was an interesting change of pace to include 4 segments over the usual 3, in previous episodes at least one of the stories would outweigh the others in runtime. Here, however, each is roughly divided evenly, leaving some of the segments to feel rushed or anticlimactic. I like the concept of werepops, but I wish the events didn't feel so rushed and underdeveloped. It relies heavily on blatant ignorance from the main characters to meet the time constraints, and right as things are picking up, things just abruptly end. Though I absolutely love Pops' little dance once he returns to reality.
something, werewolves from London.
Chocolatude is a pretty solid spin on the temptation theme from Hansel and Gretel. It also reminded me a lot of a children's novel I read in elementary school called The Chocolate Touch. Does anybody else remember this book? Anyway, with that marking the end of the 5th installment, it's time to cap things off with our 6th and final Terror Tales of the Park, which was made available through the Cartoon Network app on October 15th, 2016, before broadcasting in the US 2 weeks later. This final special is quite different in both setting and genre, as it was released in the middle of the 8th and final season, which took place entirely in space. This change in setting dramatically altered the show's original dynamic, mixing the mundane with the surreal, making that contrast virtually impossible to illustrate. So while the show's canon was building up to a big epic showdown against the most powerful antagonist the gang had encountered, Anti-Pops, voiced by Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund, this episode offers a fun, self-contained detour, utilizing the space theme to center its segments more on sci-fi horror parodies and references compared to its predecessors. The overarching story this time consists of the park crew hanging out with some of Season 8's recurring characters at the annual Halloween party, while their ship, the Containment Dome, is left on autopilot. Recap Robot, their assistant droid, informs the group that it has never experienced fear before, but has installed a new fearometer to help gauge the emotion. Needless to say, everyone takes this as a challenge to see who can scare the robot the most. Unlike Terror Tales 5, this special returns to the usual 3-story format. The first tale, Fear Planet, is told by Skips. The plot centers on him, Mordecai, Rigby, Benson, and Pops, who must make an emergency pit stop on Fear Planet to refill their fuel supply. The catch is that on this planet, all your worst fears manifest into reality, forcing the group to complete their task while desperately trying to keep their minds clear. Of course, these attempts fail horrendously, and the guys are forced to endure the nightmare of floating sharks, flying disc freestylers, and creepy amusement park mascots, with the joke being that one of those fears is clearly not like the others. The second story comes from Eileen and is a parody based on a cult classic Italian sci-fi film from the 1960s called Planet of the Vampires, except this one actually features vampires. It opens with the core group, minus Benson and High Five Ghost, concluding a night of trick-or-treating when they stumble upon an old Victorian castle. A sign promises king-size candy bars, and since the gang were mostly only given dental hygiene products, everyone agrees to check the place out. They quickly realize the manor is inhabited by space vampires, who one by one pick off each guest. Hilariously, the hunt for candy continues, despite having to fight off a swarm of blood-hungry vampires in the process. While the five are eventually revived and get to live an immortal life eating king-size candy bars, they quickly find that they taste super bland, only craving the sweet taste of blood. The final tale in Terror Tales is narrated by Rigby and is a fitting parody of arguably the most popular sci-fi horror franchise, Alien. The story opens with the park crew drastically low on funds and looking to take in a new roommate. After interviewing several renters with no luck, they nearly lose hope until a xenomorph by the name of Shannon arrives. However, they soon realize how truly terrible this alien roommate is. The rest of the story follows the crew trying desperately to get rid of Shannon, resulting in an over-the-top battle climax until Muscle Man reenacts the ending of Aliens, successfully launching the xenomorph into the vastness of space. As for the Umbrella plotline, the gang is interrupted after receiving an alert that their ship is off course and heading directly into a black hole. Unable to steer away, they're all sucked in, and the horrifying spaghettification process begins, before they become literal spaghetti and meatballs. The food is then revealed to be a close-up of Neil deGrasse Tyson's dinner plate. He apologizes for the inconvenience before finishing them off, with the final words in all of Terror Tales being Neil deGrasse Tyson breaking the fourth wall to wish the viewers at home a happy Halloween. It's great. Looking back on all 6 specials, what I think stands out the most is the sheer variety in horror subgenres and parodies, and especially how many memorable, unique antagonists these episodes spawned. While I wouldn't call every installment a perfect home run, even at its occasional weak points, it always offered at least some fun, absurd gags or a creative twist. You could always guarantee to see the gang in situations that led to a level of carnage and total chaos that was more restrained in the regular episodes, like featuring a famous cameo of Neil deGrasse Tyson playing a fictionalized version of himself, getting to witness nightmarish character possessions and wild body horror transformations. The entire run makes for a perfect binge watch if you're looking to get into the spooky Halloween season, which hopefully isn't over by the time that I get this larger than expected project finished. finished. With that said, if you made it this far, drop a like and subscribe to see more videos like this in the future. Also, let me know what your favorite episode or specific segment is from Terror Tales. Personally, I think the first 3 are especially nostalgic. But other than that, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.